right, good afternoon, everyone. It's shortly after 5, and we'll call the Diversion Authority meeting to order today. I've been asked to chair today's meeting. Mary is in Bismarck, acting on some diversion business there. So we will start with a roll call, please.
Mrs. Sherling?
Here.
Mr. Peterson? Mr. Steen?
Here.
Dr. Mahoney? Mr. Pepcorn?
Here.
Mr. Grinberg?
Here.
Mr. Judd? Mr. Hendrickson?
Here.
Mr. Paulson?
Here.
Mr. Campbell?
Here.
Mr. Wayland?
Here.
Mr. Thorstad? Here. Mr. Olson?
Do we have any others on the phone? Okay. All right, so item number 2, item number 2, we have the election of the vice chair and designation of secretary. And as you know, according to our bylaws, that the chair position alternates every other year between North Dakota and Minnesota. So this year, Mary Sherling will be the chair. And so we are opening it up now for nominations for vice chair.
I would nominate Commissioner Campbell for vice chair. Second.
We have a motion and a second for Commissioner Campbell. Do we have any other nominations? In Minnesota, we call that 3 times. So any other nominations? Third and final call. Any other nominations? Seeing none. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, the same sign. Motion carried. We'll move into item number 3, the approval of the minutes from the previous meetings.
Move to approve the minutes of the previous meetings.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Oh, yes, yeah, okay, I'll come back to that, yep. All in favor of that signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, the same sign. Motion carried. And we do have to designate our secretary, and that has been Heather, and she's told me that she's willing to do that again. So we need a motion.
So moved.
All right, second. We have a motion and a second. Further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, the same sign. Motion carried. Item number 4 is the approval of the agenda. And I do have one item that we would like to add on as item number 5C, and that is to authorize the Diversion Authority staff and consultants to submit a permit application to the Buffalo Red River Watershed District for items of the project under Buffalo Red River Watershed permitting jurisdiction. So I would ask that that be added, and if we could have...
I'll move to approve the order of the agenda as amended.
Okay. We have a motion? Do we have a second?
Second.
A second, Chuck. All in favor? Well, actually, yeah, all in favor of that motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, the same sign. Motion carried. We'll move into item number 5, PMC report. Kim, you're going to give that report? Good
Thank you.
afternoon.
All right, thanks. So I'd like to go over the Diversion Authority activities and accomplishments. In December, end of December 27th, the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources issued the Dam Safety and Public Waters Permit. Land acquisition program resumed. The RFP for appraisal services was issued. The Diversion Authority leadership testified in front of the North Dakota Senate Appropriations Committee on January 10th, and a letter to request an amendment to the PPA to secure additional federal funding was sent or submitted to the Assistant Secretary of the Army and the U.S. Corps of Engineers. All right. The priority areas for February would be there is a Senate hearing on the diversion funding request. That's tomorrow in Bismarck. On February 5th to 7th, there's a trip to Washington, D.C. To discuss the Plan B and funding opportunities for Plan B. The priority would also be to continue to coordinate with the local entities and secure grants, state grants and loans. That's as part of the hearing, the funding request in North Dakota, in Bismarck. And then also to support the Corps' efforts to certify the federal project cost estimate, which is due on January 31st. Okay, some additional February priority areas. Legal counsel to continue to coordinate with the DNR and the Corps with the objective to dismiss the litigation and to remove the injunction, to resume land acquisition and impacted properties mitigation activities, to select a team of qualified appraisers, which you heard about earlier, and subject to board approval, submit the permit application to the Buffalo Red River Watershed District, that's later on the agenda, and to submit a revised CLOMAR to FEMA. That would occur in, I believe, late February to early March. Okay. Going on to the program status and the cash budget. Again, this is a comparison against the $2.2 billion budget. The actual cost to date is $453 million, which leaves a remaining program budget of about 1.76. Going forward, in the February board meeting, we will report against the $2.75 billion budget. And then the fiscal year 2018 cash budget, the fiscal year 2018 cash budget of $82.5 million. Out of that, pay to date, about $37.9 million, which leaves a remaining fiscal year 2018 budget of $44 million. That's it.
Any questions of Kim? Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you.
Item number 5B, Corps of Engineers update. Do we have anything from the Corps? None? Okay, we'll move on to 5C, and that is the agenda addition item, and that's, I think we're going to have if you haven't gotten it, there should be a letter in your packet, and just a brief history on this is that we did meet as an executive committee early on to discuss some of these issues in regards to the Buffalo Red, and the executive committee had asked me to present to the Buffalo Red last Monday, I believe it was, the date is, I think it was last Monday, just to let them know that our intentions were to submit a permit for, as is required through one of the conditions by the Minnesota DNR permit. Having said that, I went to them and I told them that it was our intention to do so. So at this point, John, if you could give us what we need to have accomplished today, because this is an action item that we would like to do today.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Vice Chair, members of the Diversion Authority Board. Before you, you have a request to authorize staff and the Diversion Authority consultants to submit an application to Buffalo Red River Watershed District, a permit application for infrastructure that's located within their jurisdiction. As the Vice Chair pointed out, the Minnesota DNR findings of fact indicated a need to apply to Buffalo Red for infrastructure located within their jurisdiction. Commissioner Campbell attended their meeting on the 14th and indicated that we would in fact be submitting an application. I think one of the questions that they had that when we later met with them was, just briefly, why did you wait until after the Minnesota DNR issued its permit? And just for public information, we really didn't have a full understanding of the scope of the Minnesota DNR permit until the permit was issued. And so from a linear standpoint, we needed to have the DNR permit in place first, and then we apply to the necessary local jurisdiction as defined by the DNR. And so we thought it was very timely. Once we received the Minnesota DNR permit at the end of December, that we would start the application process for Buffalo Red River Watershed District. And so we crafted this letter. The actual permit application is currently being developed and should be finalized to be submitted by the 28th along with the letter. Technical staff have been reviewing it, and legal staff will look over it also to make sure that it is consistent with what the DNR had indicated in their permit. And so it's a step that we need to move forward with, and we want to make sure that we're in compliance with what's required of us by Minnesota DNR. Can certainly answer any questions about the process that you might have. I would say from a program standpoint, we will need to make sure that we have somebody that is following up on the permit application. So likely there'll be somebody that will have a reoccurring statement or item on the agenda for the Buffalo Red Watershed District during the time the permit application has been submitted, and then assuming that they grant the permit, working with them as we construct, as the Corps constructs the project and as we construct the elements of the project that we're responsible for.
Any questions of John? So what's the, this is something that I think is important for us to do, and it's, at this point, it's very timely, and I would certainly encourage us to move forward with this action item. And I'm looking for a motion to authorize.
I'll make that motion.
I'll second it.
We have a motion by Grant, second by Chuck. Any further discussion? Seeing none, roll call vote, please.
Mrs. Schirling,
Yes.
Mr. Steen,
Yes.
Mr. Pepcorn,
Aye.
Mr. Grinberg,
Aye.
Mr. Hendrickson,
Yes.
Mr. Paulson,
Yes.
Mr. Campbell,
Yes.
Mr. Wayland,
Yes.
Mr. Thorstead,
Yes.
Mr. Olson,
Yes.
Thank you, John. We'll move into item number 6, administrative and legal, and the first item we have is adopt our meeting schedule for 2019, and we did have that in your packet. Mike, is there somebody that wants to comment on this schedule, or?
Mr. Chair and members of the authority, no direct comments on the schedule itself. I would just note this will be our last meeting in this space. We will move over to the new City Hall Commission chambers next month at the end of February. So this will be the last time we gather here.
All right, thank you. And
Thanks.
so as of now, you're asking for us to adopt this schedule as been presented?
Yeah, that's right.
So moved.
Okay, we have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, the same sign. Motion carried. We'll get into approval of the committee appointments, and those have, I believe, all entities have submitted their new member names for all the various committees. Do we have any further discussion on that, or do we have a motion to approve the proposed committee assignments? Oh, Rick. Yes.
I'll move to approve the proposed committee assignments.
Okay, we have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, second by Joel. Discussion? Seeing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carried. Okay, we'll then move into item number 6C, cost share agreement with MetroCog. John, or Mike, you're going to do that one?
Mr. Chair and members of the authority, at the Finance Committee that immediately preceded your board meeting, the committee unanimously recommended the approval of this cost share agreement. This is a cost share agreement with MetroCog to study the various recreational elements of the program. This is a plan that it was last touched in 2012, so we have not adjusted any of those plans after we developed the Plan B project, and so this is planning work that will be ongoing in 2019 and 2020. Your budget estimates are contained in the packet, and as soon as that is wrapped up and we have a sense of what the types of projects might be, we'll also look to apply for grants and find other funding opportunities, as well as work with the P3 proposer to construct some of these projects in the communities that surround the project, including Horace, West Fargo, as well as the other communities. So it's in your packet. Again, unanimous recommendation of the Finance Committee.
Right. Again, this was put put through the Finance Committee meeting a short time ago with approval, recommended for approval. What's the board's wishes?
I'll move to approve.
Okay. We have a motion by Rick. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mike. Roll call vote, please.
Mrs. Sherling?
Yes.
Mr. Steen?
Yes.
Mr. Pepcorn?
Aye.
Mr. Grinberg?
Aye.
Mr. Hendrickson?
Aye.
Mr. Paulson?
Aye.
Mr. Campbell?
Yes.
Mr. Wayland?
Yes.
Mr. Thorsted?
Yes.
Mr. Olson?
Yes.
All right, very good. That motion carried. All right, we'll move into item number 7, committee reports, public outreach. Roger.
The Outreach Committee this afternoon at 1:30, and we discussed quite a few items that are going on with the project, which included the DNR permit decision and some of the timelines going forward. Another topic was the North Dakota Legislature and testimony that's going on out there on certain bills, which would include appropriations for this project and other bills that are of interest to this project. Had opportunities, a couple opportunities this last month to actually ask or answer questions about the project, and one was at the Red River Basin Commission Conference out in Grand Forks. Jason Benson from the county gave a real nice presentation, and so good that he only received one question on the project. So we evidently are moving forward, and people are starting to understand our project. The other one was the FM West Fargo Chamber Eggs and Issues event. So I think Jason also presented there. Talked about the partnership with MetroCog and Recreation Planning. And then I also look forward to the 90-day outlook on some of the key activities that will be going forward, and I'll roll that into the land outreach and how we're going to look at interacting with landowners and property owners that we need to acquire land from. And we'll be sending out letters shortly, I would say within a couple weeks or sooner, to 3 different groups of landowners, ones that we need to acquire land from, and ones that we need to purchase flowage easements from, and the third, and actually one is for purchase on the channel, and then other mitigation needed, so we'll need land for that. So there would be 3 different letters going out to landowners, explain the process and explain that their land most likely is going to be required for the project, and try to spell out what the process is. So we're going to try to engage that process. FMDiversion.com have a new website. Please visit it. It's updated, easier to follow, easier, I think, to use. And also the analytics from our online work through Twitter, and we're seeing good response. And especially, Tammy isn't here, but she gave us an update, and she said there was good response after the permit was signed, and just a lot of activity. So people are finding that website and Twitter and making comments and getting information that they need to keep up with the project. And finally, we listened to a 3 questions video by former Mayor Delray Williams on how important the project is for Moorhead. She did an excellent job on the 3 questions. If you go to the website, you can watch that. It was very good. So that's all I have. Tom.
Okay, thanks, Roger. As Roger mentioned, Eggs and Issues last week was a success. It was put together very quickly by the chamber, and we had a good turnout. We had all the mayors there, and It was moderated on behalf of the Business Leaders Task Force. We've also, the task force has put together meetings for the next month and a half. So we will be now meeting every other week until the end of February with all the legislative issues and with probably the need to mobilize some of our members to get out to Bismarck. We thought we should just really stay on top of this and be very active in our meetings. So so we scheduled those this afternoon, and so I'll be reporting back at this meeting.
Thank you, Tom.
You bet.
Any other questions of Roger or Tom? We'll move into the land management, and I guess I'll give that report here. I sat in for Mary chairing that meeting this afternoon, and we spent most of the time talking about the initiatives moving forward with the lands and with the strong emphasis on the task force order number 4, which really is the overall total land acquisition costs that we're looking to establish throughout the remainder of the project. So it came to our lands management group, voted to move it forward, that we, for approval by this board, and I know it'll be part of the Finance Committee report, I'm sure, by Rick. But it's we're looking at $500 million task order here, but it's good for the duration of the project, and we'll probably hear a little bit more about that here in a little bit. But that was the issue there. We talked a little bit about the processes of land acquisition and the steps that go forward through the Cass Water Board in North Dakota, and we did talk a little bit about on the Minnesota side, there's some differences there, and we're working on forming an entity that would handle basically the same type of scenarios as the Cass Resource Board does. And with that in mind, we have also, so we met as Minnesota members of the board to work on drafting that, how that procedure will work in Minnesota. And we have put out a formal request to the Buffalo Red board to consider appointing up to 2 members to also be part of that group. And so there was a formal letter that Commissioner Wayland, as our Clay County Board Chair, and myself signed on behalf of our Minnesota group today, that went out this morning, inviting them to partake in that. And that's going to be on the agenda for next Monday night as well. So we'll be there giving that presentation and encouraging them to be part of that to help issues with the concerns they have regarding Minnesota landowners and how they're treated. I think that's pretty much all I have, unless there's any other. Eric, do you want to comment any more?
I think you did a great job. We're planning to get into more details about Task Order 4 here under the contracting actions, so I could probably address those things at that point.
Okay, great. All right, thank you. So we'll move in then to item number, unless there's more questions of the land management, we'll move into item number 9A. That's the committee report. Rick, I'm assuming you're going to give that?
Committee report will be fairly short here. We did receive a report from Kim from our PMC, and some of that was covered earlier. We did get a financial update from Kent Costin. I'll cover some of that here as I get on to that part of the report. We approved, recommended approval of the MetroCog cost share agreement that was approved here earlier. And the Finance Committee did approve 2 land acquisition directives. One referred to as opportunistic property acquisitions. That was a total of $14,924,000. And the second LAD was the Diversion Channel Phase 3 acquisitions, which totaled $23,851,000. Part of the financial report included some information That is in your packet. To date, this is item number 9A in your packet. We've received total revenues in the DA of $538,567,000 and total expenditures of $453,733,000. Currently cash available or cash balance is $84,833,000. In addition, it was pointed out by Kent that we also have untapped line of credit available going forward for about $50 million from the line of credit. I think it's the Wells Fargo Bank, if I'm not mistaken on that. That would be the committee report. Moving on to...
There's no action needed on the committee? Okay.
The next item would be voucher approval in item 9B in your packet. The Finance Committee recommended approval of total bills totaling $244,667.80, and I would make that motion.
Okay, we have a motion to approve the paying of those bills.
Second.
Second by Dave. Any further discussion? Seeing none, roll call.
Mrs. Sherling? Mrs. Sherling?
Yes.
Mr. Steen?
Yes?
Mr. Pepcorn?
Aye.
Mr. Grinberg? Mr. Hendrick?
Aye.
Mr. Hendrickson? Mr. Paulson? Mr. Campbell?
Yes.
Mr. Wayland?
Yes.
Mr. Thorson?
Yes.
Mr. Olson?
Yes.
All right, that motion carries.
All right, and the last item under finance is the recommended contracting actions. We did spend a fair amount of time on a number of these, the biggest one being order number 4, but I think we're going to cover several of those. And Kim, you're going to cover those for us, I believe.
Yes, I'll cover 2 of them, and then I'll turn it over to John Shockley. The first one, there was a co-executive director approved task order amendment. That's for an HMG contract. It's task order 13, amendment number 19, design levy and design support. That's to add about $83,000 to that contract. It extends the period of performance, and it also adds some additional scope and budget for right-of-way surveying and design services. And then the next was a co-executive director approved change order. That was for work package 42F2, change order number 4, in-town levies, Second Street South flood controls. That was Hogue, and that's to close out that contract. So that is an adjustment to reduce the budget amount by $193,000. And I'll turn it over to John for the other 2 contracting.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair, members of the Diversion Authority. The next item is a amendment number 2 to task order 2, which is an amendment to the PMC task order. You may recall that for the last year, the PMC has been operated in a stand-down mode, so there's been limited services provided by the PMC, and that was due to the injunction. And so we've really been operating at a more of a what is needed to keep the project going. Given that we are still in the process of obtaining the funding and financing for the project as part of the legislative process and working through resolution of the injunction process, we deemed it to be prudent to do a simple task order extension of that task order through the April 30th. April 30th coincides with the approximate end of the legislative session, and by that time we should have better information regarding what activities have occurred at the state level, the federal level, and then also information back from our litigation counsel regarding the status of the litigation. And so this would extend that task order. The cost for the additional extension for that time period is $1,750,000. It does add some clarity regarding task order C. This has been reviewed and approved by the co-executive directors and myself. I can certainly answer any questions that you might have about it, but it is ready for approval. It's been recommended by the Finance Committee for approval also.
All right. Do we have any questions on those task orders? All right, so we take it task order number 2, amendment number 2 first. Okay, all right, so we have a motion on that?
I move to approve task order 2, amendment number 2 for
Okay,
$1,750,000.
we have a motion. Roger, is that a second? Okay. Any further discussion? None, all, roll call vote, please.
Mrs. Shirley?
Yes.
Mr. Steen?
Yes?
Mr. Pepcorn?
Aye.
Mr. Grinberg?
Aye.
Mr. Hendrickson?
Aye.
Mr. Paulson?
Aye.
Mr. Campbell?
Yes.
Mr. Wayland?
Yes.
Mr. Thorstad?
Yes.
Mr. Olson?
Yes.
Okay, next we then have task order number 04, amendment number 00 for property acquisition services.
Thank you. We have a presentation regarding task order number 4, which is authorizing the acquisition of the remainder of the property for the entire project. I'm going to set the table for this item, and then Eric Dodds will be going through the process for acquiring property. I would first note that the process that Eric is going to outline is being utilized on the North Dakota side. We anticipate that on the Minnesota side, it will closely mirror the process, but there will be some nuances for acquisitions of property in Minnesota. You will recall that as part of the Minnesota DNR permit process, we are required to acquire property in Minnesota pursuant to Minnesota law. There's a few nuances regarding how property is acquired, but in large part, the acquisition process will be very similar. This is viewed as a critical path task for the project, irregardless of when you bid out the contracting actions for the different elements of the project. You will need the property to build the infrastructure on. There also is the ability for the Diversion Authority to mitigate some of its risks if it has the land in hand prior to trying to bid out the project. And I'll get into those a little bit more in the second half of the presentation. But Eric is going to go through the process and the structure for acquiring property. As this was vetted out, there were some questions about what is the relationship of the different boards and committees, and how does that information process work?
Thanks, John. Thanks, members of the authority. So as John noted, we wanted to walk through a brief presentation here. This presentation was developed in part as we started developing and reviewing this proposed task order. We had a handful of meetings with the co-exec directors and others that are certainly involved in the project, but maybe not as involved in the day-by-day work of buying land. And so there was some good questions asked that really made us realize, we probably need to explain a little bit more about what's the structure in place, what are the processes being used for the property acquisition program. And so I did present this earlier today at both the Land Committee and the Finance Committee. And hopefully what you hear is very similar to what they've heard. So, first off, wanted to just start with an org chart for the overall diversion authority, and this is generalized, of course, but intended to put a little bit of some of the lands program in perspective. On the top of the org chart here, you see the member entities that make up the diversion authority and how many seats at the table that each entity provides. On the right-hand side, you see the Finance, Land, and Public Outreach Committees. Those are standing committees of the Diversion Authority. On the left side, you see the federal partner in the Corps of Engineers, as well as the two lead state agencies, the State Water Commission and the Minnesota DNR. And then on the bottom half of this graphic, you see a variety of different blocks of different consultant groups. On the left side, bottom left, is land acquisition. I'll get into that a little bit more. Moving to the right, the technical consultant, which is the HMG group, the program management consultant team, which is CH2M or Jacobs, along with A2S. There's a series of firms involved in P3, development of the P3 procurement program. And then on the far right side is the legal counsel team, Onstead Twitchell, as well as Dorsey. Going forward here, the next graphic up on the screen highlights the lands-related components of this org chart. I think most of this is on your table, but I realize I maybe didn't hand this out, so. So while those are being passed around, I guess I'm going to keep walking through the presentation here. On the screen, you see a variety of orange-colored portions of the org chart, and these orange-colored portions are the lands-related components. On the top left, you see the Cass County Joint Water Resource District. That is highlighted in orange. The Cass County Joint Water Resource District has one seat at the Diversion Authority table, filled by Roger Olson. The Joint Water Resource District also has the responsibility for buying lands in North Dakota. In addition, they have the responsibility for the Special Assessment District. The lands role was really established many years ago because the Cass County Joint Water Resource District has the statutory authority through the North Dakota Century Code to buy land across the entire geography of the project in North Dakota. You'll also see that I've highlighted Moorhead and Clay County. Right now, as you've heard, there's wheels in motion to establish a joint powers entity between Moorhead and Clay and perhaps the Buffalo Red Board to really form an entity that buys the land rights in Minnesota, and so that would be the companion entity essentially for Minnesota land rights. The Land Management Committee is involved with a lot of lands policy, and then moving down to the lower left, you see the land acquisition box or circle of consultants. There's appraisers. We have an appraisal services RFP that's on the street being advertised right now. Responses to that RFP are due back in early February. We have 3 different land firms that are contracted to provide negotiating services as well as relocation specialists, a variety of things I'll get into a little bit more detail. In the lower bottom half of this graphic, you'll see under the program management consultant a highlighted portion that says property acquisition and mitigation management. That's really the bulk of task order 4, which there'll be more details about. And then on the right side, you see Onsted Twitchell providing the property acquisition services, developing purchase agreements, condemnation in the event we need to use that. So zooming in a little bit closer on this is a separate org chart really focused on the Cass County Joint Board. This is the organizational structure in general that the Joint Board is using to buy the land rights in North Dakota. So the Cass County Joint Board works with Onsted Twitchell on the regular business as well as through the acquisitions necessary for the diversion project. The PMC box there represents the Jacobs A2S team, providing that suite of services related to managing the acquisition program. The PMC group is contracted to the Diversion Authority, but they receive direction and work under the direction of the Cass County Joint Board. As I mentioned just a few minutes ago, we have an RFP on the street for appraisal services. Those appraisers will be contracted to the Joint Board, and eventually we think we'll have appraisers that will be contracted to the Minnesota acquiring entity. We also have 3 separate land firms, HMG, ProSource, and Alteg. Those are all contracted directly to the Cass County Joint Board. They provide, again, land agents, relocation specialists. These are people that are meeting with property owners at the kitchen table, in the shop, talking about appraisals, talking about trying to negotiate an acquisition. We have a pretty robust process that we use to acquire the land. And it's a fairly linear process that starts with the design. So whether the design is being done by the Corps, or whether it's being done by the Houston Moore Group, or whether it's being done by the P3 firm, the design really establishes where the impacts are and which property rights need to be acquired. Once those are established, we develop what's called a land acquisition directive. We bring that to the Finance Committee and basically ask the Finance Committee to direct the Cass County Joint Board and in the future the Minnesota acquiring entity to go buy certain lands. And so the Finance Committee just approved 2 of those earlier today, one for the diversion channel, the remaining portions of the channel, and another for a variety of property owners who have reached out and asked to move forward with the acquisition process. Many times before the LAD, but certainly after the LAD, we make contact with the property owners, and this is really engaging the land firms. They go out, they make phone calls, they try to meet on site, visit with property owners, try to develop some type of relationship if they can, request access to go complete a survey of the property. We need to conduct boundary surveys. Those boundary surveys are then used in the appraisal process. The appraiser does their work, they submit it for review. We have a team of review appraisers on board. Once that appraisal is reviewed, it goes to the Cass County Joint Board for approval, and then we present the offer of just compensation to the property owner. And so this is the offer for us buying their property that we need for the project, and that starts the negotiation process again with our land agents out in the field. In addition to the offer of just compensation, many of these property owners may be displaced, meaning we might have a residential property that we need to buy out, and the tenants or the occupants of that residential property need to find a replacement house. And so they are eligible for relocation benefits. These are things such as moving costs, such as reconnecting their cable service, potentially things such as reconnecting water service, a variety of other things necessary to find a decent, safe, and sanitary replacement housing. Assuming we're able to strike a voluntary deal, we sign a purchase agreement and then close on the property. We recognize that there's a lot of decisions that get made there, especially in the back half of those negotiations, and so we've put together a sort of 5-layer structure for decision-making on the acquisition deals. This graphic here demonstrates the 5-layer structure. We have a lands coordination team that meets every 2 weeks before the Cass County Joint Board. This is primarily staff, some of the land firm managers, some of our team, as well as a couple of representatives from the Cass County Joint Board. And all of the acquisition deals come to this group. Many of them are fairly straightforward, and so they're just minor deviations from the appraised amount. And so those move on to the Joint Board for approval. If there is something sticky or there's questions or uncertainty, then it gets bubbled up to these other layers. The administrative advisory team has been in place for a number of years. That's Mr. Redlinger, Mr. Wilson, some of the finance team, technical team. And that group helps review whether there's issues that should be directed to a policy decision or sort of take issues that might not be handled at the land coordination level. In addition, we've also put in place what we called a strategic negotiating team. This is really the chair of the Finance Committee, the chair of the Land Committee, as well as the chair of the Cass County Joint Board. And so that three-headed group is involved with some strategic decisions. Unfortunately, at times we end up with decisions about, well, do we accept the counteroffer? Do we counter their counteroffer? Or do we just have to go to court, which nobody is a fan of, but ultimately those decisions need to be made. The Land Management Committee is really focused on policy, and then the Cass County Joint Board is involved, is sort of the final say as they're the entity acquiring the land. Generally speaking, we try to make these decisions at as low of level as possible. We have over 1,200 parcels of land that we need to acquire property rights on, and so there's an awful lot of work to be done, and we're trying to make those decisions at the lowest level that we can. But we will be reporting progress out to the Land Committee, the Finance Committee, as well as the Diversion Board. This map here is a snapshot of some acquisition status. This map is probably a few weeks old. We've made a little bit of progress since the permit was made. Generally, green is good. Green means we've acquired the parcel. Blue means we're in negotiations. There's a few purples up here on the north end. It might be a little tricky to see, but those are parcels where we have a purchase agreement signed and we're just waiting for the closing to happen. You see we've made pretty good progress on the north end of the diversion channel. We've made a handful of acquisitions down in the southern, in the staging area, and continue to make progress as things move forward. Along with that mapping, we have some routine sort of block graphics that we've used. This is just an example of a portion of the project where we've acquired a certain number of parcels, and just to give you a flavor of what that reporting will look like. In terms of the lands program itself, I wanted to just share a little bit of information. Of course, we need to acquire property rights for the diversion channel as well as the southern embankment. We need to acquire flowage easements in the upstream mitigation area, as well as remove most of the structures from the upstream mitigation area. There are a variety of environmental mitigation sites scattered across the drains and riverways in the region. All told, over 1,200 parcels. Collectively, it's about a $500 million program to get all the land rights for the project that we anticipate is going to take somewhere between 6 and 8 years.
That $500 million cost of the lands program, of course, we've made some pretty good progress to date, but we have an awful lot of work yet to do ahead of us. I did want to point out that that $500 million is part of the overall project budget, the $2.75 billion that you've heard about in previous meetings. So I think with that, I'm going to pitch it back to John to talk a little bit more details about the task order.
Thank you, Eric. Mr. Vice Chair, members of the committee, the couple of key outcomes from the task order that I'd like to talk about as you consider approval of it. So in this task order, some of the primary objectives are to have outreach to all impacted property owners. One of the issues that we've been hearing about is from different entities, we need to have more outreach to property owners that are impacted by the project. I think that was one of the concerns that we heard from members of the Buffalo Red River Watershed District Board. This task order authorizes having outreach to those impacted property owners in Q1. Just for public information, one of the questions may be, well, why weren't you engaged in property acquisition prior to this? As a result of the Minnesota permitting process, the DNR had asked, and we had observed, that we would not acquire properties so that it wouldn't prejudice the permitting process through Minnesota DNR. So during the stand-down period, we had put on hold property acquisition along with outreach to affected property owners. And so now with this task order, we would restart that process and task. The second major takeaway from the task order is the acquisition of all property rights necessary to build and operate the project. This is a real key takeaway. This will help the Diversion Authority mitigate some of its risks, especially with the P3 channel. Having all of the property in place for the P3 component will certainly potentially reduce the risk associated to Diversion Authority, and also can result in a reduced bid from the P3 contractors. You may ask, why is that? The P3 contractors would like to have access to the entire right-of-way for the channel so that they can mitigate potential losses that would occur if there was a flood event on part of the channel construction or adverse weather or construction conditions. They can remobilize their equipment on another location in the channel. Also, there's opportunities for the P3 teams to utilize economies of scale. Perhaps they want to construct all the bridges at one time or start digging on both ends of the channel. Having all the right-of-way in place at the time that the notice to proceed to construct is issued can help reduce the cost of the P3 bid. It also mitigates the risk for the Diversion Authority by ensuring that we're not in a situation in which the Diversion Authority is responsible for holding up execution of a contract because we don't have the appropriate contract rights or land rights. It's estimated that this process is going to take 6 to 8 years. As Eric had noted, that it is a $500 million line item for all of the lands. Also included in the task order is the management of impacted property mitigation. That includes some ongoing work in completing that. That's the flowage easement valuation. That is a process that's ongoing. I believe phase 1 of that has been completed, and that will establish a baseline for values for flowage easements within the staging area of the project, along with ag mitigation. And once again, this will really maintain a critical path for the project. Regardless of when the project is bid, we need to have the land rights in place in order to construct it. And so this is absolutely a critical path for both the southern embankment, the P3 channel, and the other infrastructure of the project. So the overview, this task order authorizes the acquisition of the diversion channel, the southern embankment, the upstream mitigation area. I think as part of public information, it's important to remember that what came out of the governor's task force was the increased flow through town, elevating that from 35 to 37 feet, means that the upstream area will see the project operate less frequently. Now it's predicted to operate once every 20 years. And so that area has decreased in size slightly, but more importantly, the frequency of operation is less. and the impacts of the project should be less unless it's absolutely close to the southern embankment where you would expect the depth and duration to be a little bit greater. As Eric indicated, there's approximately 1,200 parcels that need to be acquired as part of this acquisition. Some parcels are in complete fee simple, that means buying title to it, while other parcels in the storage area will have a flowage easement on them. The overall task is $500 million, and it's an 8-year project. I can certainly answer any questions that you might have. The task order has been reviewed by both co-executive directors, myself. It's been vetted out with some of the leadership of the Diversion Authority. The Land Committee recommended approval, as did the Finance Committee. And so this is the final action before the Diversion Board, and we're certainly able to answer any questions that you might have regarding it. And I do want to note that as part of that review process, there was language added to the task order that making it clear that the task order is consistent with the underlying agreement with CH2M, now Jacobs, that if there was a termination or a default under that agreement, that the task order would also terminate. So they're consistent, and I can certainly answer any questions you might have.
Okay, thank you, John.
Question, and for someone, and this is, Finance Committee moved this forward, and I've had time because I've seen the presentation 3 times now, so I was looking at some of the other stuff. And I just noticed on this, and I should have noticed it earlier, the cover letter refers to $21,180,600. The table is $21,180,600, and I think the task order includes $21,200,000. So I believe the correct amount is at $21,180,600.
In the,
Page 13 refers to 21,280. Cover letter is 21, and I did the, sitting here listening, I was doing the math at the same time, multitasking. I think we should have approved the 21,180, if I'm not mistaken.
I know there were some sort of last edits made after we had met, and so I probably have a typo in one of those locations. We can certainly
I
clean
think
that
the
up.
typo's on page 13, and
well,
then
on 13, it says $21,200,800.
right.
And on the contracting actions, right here in our packet, on
21,200.
it says $21,200,800.
Yep, and I
Or the-
and I looked at the cover letter along with the tables. I think it's just something happened with the last things. I believe that the correct number is the 21,180,600, because that's what the table adds up to, and I re-added that. So I just, before I would just suggest that we approve that amount if we approve this. You guys concurrence with that?
It's fine.
All right.
Frankly, if I'm that accurate after 8 years, I'll be surprised.
Right. Yes, Joel.
Eric, this question is probably for you. The time frame looks like 6 to 8 years for the acquisition process. Is that related to resources, or if there were more resources, would that be able to be expedited?
Great question. I think there are a few resources that we expect are going to be limiting, but not any one resource is a limiting factor. We've got an appraisal RFP that's on the street right now. In the past, we've struggled with having enough qualified appraisers, and so we're shoring that up. We've been worried about do we have enough land agents out there to meet with all the property owners. Over the last probably 3 or 4 months, we've been in routine conversation with these land firms and asking them to be ready, be ready, be ready. Well, since we've got the permit, we've really seen them step up to the plate and be ready. They're bringing on some more resources. We're having more and more property owners reaching out to us, which I think is a great scenario to have, where the best time to buy is when somebody's selling something. And so I think that might help expedite the situation. But also, we're waiting for the designs to be done. The Corps is going to have multi-years worth of design before they're ready to say this is the final land needs for the portions of the staging area or the southern embankment. And then, frankly, there's just a tremendous amount of properties in the upstream area that it's going to take a long time to get to all those. And it's going to take a long time to construct the project as well, and we don't need to displace all those people until the construction is, ready or nearing completion. And so in some situations, we might have property owners that have, a kid in high school and they want to stay there and have the graduation party in their garage and do that sort of thing before the project comes and requires them to move out of the way. In other cases, we have people who are sort of begging for an acquisition yesterday, and so there's all sorts of dynamics out there. I think, generally the schedule is trying to incorporate all of that, but I think probably the biggest factor on the, the duration of this is related. It's going to take that long to construct the project, and so we don't need to have those land rights ahead of time. Now, if we happen to buy them all ahead of time, that'd be great.
And one additional question. You didn't mention how the Public Outreach Committee might be engaged with the public outreach component of the task order. Is there going to be collaboration between those two?
So as currently all of the program management consultant services are wrapped up into one big task order, and it was suggested that we ought to split that into a couple different parts. And so task order 4 is the first of those parts. I think in the coming months there'll be a task order 5 and a task order 6 for P3. So the outreach related components of the lands program are front-loaded into this task order, where we know we need to get out and meet with all the impacted property owners, so we have the scope and some fees baked into this task order to allow us to assemble those letters, get them out to the property owners, perhaps do some sort of initial meetings, and do kind of this sort of ramp-up of outreach to landowners in 2019. We do think that'll be kind of a, I don't want to say, once and done, because there's obviously going to be, many interactions with property owners, but in terms of this mass mailing campaign, that'll happen here early in the next coming weeks. And then at that point, we expect task order 5, which will include kind of the bulk of outreach, sort of ongoing services, would be able to pick up the remaining outreach-related efforts.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Any other questions? So, it's my understanding then on task order 4, that we are acknowledging that there's $500 million worth of lands to acquire in this whole project. And with that, we are authorizing under task order number 4, the corrected number of $21,180,600. And are we good there?
Yeah, we'll make that correction. I don't know how that,
Okay.
thank you for catching that.
All right. So with that, Rick, I know you're Finance Committee.
Yeah, I'll recommend move approval of task order 4, the $21,180,600.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second, and again, this is the understanding that this is something that's going to go over 6 to an 8-year period of time. And I do want to, while we're in discussion, what I do want to piggyback on one of the things that you talked about, and I was overhearing the Finance Committee today, and I think some of the total 500 million piece is really going to be, I mean, there might be some opportunities to advance some of that. And so I think through our whole financing plan, we have to be ready to shift from year to year, I think, to make sure we take advantage of opportunities. So hopefully that goes to a little bit of your question there.
Yeah, I think that makes sense, Kevin. I think there's a perception out there that we're going to start building this thing tomorrow.
No.
And so when information about a 6 to 8 period to acquire the lands, I just want to make sure that people understand that that's all going to be congruent with the actual construction of the project as well. And the lands are going to be acquired strategically, as needed for the project.
Just one other comment, as we looked at this, I get a little heartburn when I approve a 6 or 8 year contract, and one thing that was changed, and John alluded to, is there's a 30-day out clause under this contract. If things don't go right, if something goes wrong, there's a 30-day out, so.
Well, if the current contract with the PMC,
Actually, it's a separate 30-day out in addition to just this
okay.
order.
Do we have any further discussion? Any discussion from our members on the phone? Seeing none, we'll ask for a roll call vote, please.
Mrs. Schurling?
Yes.
Mr. Steen?
Yes.
Mr. Peppercorn?
Aye.
Mr. Grinberg? Mr. Hendrickson?
Yes.
Mr. Paulson?
Yes.
Mr. Campbell?
Yes.
Mr. Whalen?
Yes.
Mr. Thorsted?
Yes.
Mr. Olson?
Yes.
That that motion carries.
And that concludes the Finance Committee report.
Thank you, Rick. John, do you have anything else for us?
Yeah, I just wanted to briefly, since I don't see Kent here right now, I just wanted to give a brief update. This morning, a group of us met with Wells Fargo, just as an update. You recall, we have the temporary loan through Wells Fargo. They came through town sort of for an update on the project, on just an overall view of what our next steps for temporary financing were. The meeting went very well. They were very complimentary to how the project's being run overall, and thought we were doing a great job, and thought that it was very well organized, and they were very pleased with the activity that was going on with the project, and very impressed with the governor's task force. So just wanted to let you know that kind of an outside observer, and they brought a number of people in from around the country whenever they do these large loans to review, and it was a very good meeting.
Before John leaves, Kevin, I have a question. Are the P3 contractors getting tired yet?
Well, that's a good question. So currently, we're not asking the P3 contractors to undertake any work. We have held any activities regarding the P3 procurement in abeyance, so that they're not required to spend any funds. And so we still have all three teams that we started out with. They want us to accomplish three items to re-engage them. One is to obtain a permit from the Minnesota DNR, which we have. Two, to have a direction to resolve the litigation, which we're working on. And three, resolution to the funding piece from both the state and the federal level. And mostly just in the planning area to make sure we have a solid plan. So we're working on all three of those elements. Eric had mentioned that you would likely be seeing a P3 task order coming out. That task order probably won't come out till April or May, because we want to satisfy those three elements and then re-engage the teams. In the conversations that I've had with each of the three team leads, they're still very much interested in this project. They are very impressed with how we've handled the situation, in which every time we're presented with an issue or a problem, we find a way to overcome it. And I think that's very important to them. And so they're all three interested in it. They want to be part of the project. They want to bid on it. And each one of them, of course, wants to be successful. So.
Right, thank you.
All right, thank you, John. All right, that concludes, if we have no other business, our next meeting date, and if you will notice now what we approved on our calendar, we're going to be going to semi-monthly meetings, at least through the first 10 months of this year. And unless something changes there, we will certainly, our board chair will certainly let you know. But, so as of right now, our next meeting is scheduled for February 14th. And if there's no other business, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second by Commissioner Whalen. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All right, thank you.
Aye.